Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to have ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones here with us to talk about some resources you can turn to for law firm research. Your Law School Toolbox host today is Alison Monahan, and typically I'm with Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website, Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we have ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones here with us to talk about some resources to turn to for law firm research. So welcome, Sadie.
Thanks for having me back.
My pleasure. Well, first off, for listeners who maybe are not familiar with it, particularly 1Ls, when should students really start to think about summer jobs?
Well, it's slightly different this year than it would be normally. So I would say normally 1Ls would be looking for summer jobs sometime after winter break. And that would probably go through the spring for some 1Ls. And then 2Ls would normally have kind of just finished interviewing now. And so it would be, late summer into early fall, and they would probably be done for next summer. But this year, I think there's really going to be an overlap where 1Ls and 2Ls are sort of looking at the same time because most of the 2L recruiting has been pushed back to the winter.
Right. We have an episode people can go listen to on that if you are interested. And I think it's always good to at least think about this early, don't you think?
Absolutely. So, even in a normal cycle where 1Ls wouldn't be looking until the winter, I would still say that they should start to think about it as early as possible and sort of, start to consider what the options are. And definitely for the 2Ls, I think that even though, a lot of the recruiting may not be happening for, quite a few months, I would get a head start on it.
Right. I mean, I think we're recording this in early September. So I think by now, if you are a 2L who thinks that you're going to be getting a big firm job at OCI, I would hope that you're already at least thinking about, some information you want to be looking for in a firm. What kind of stuff should people be looking for, do you think?
Well, I think you should do a lot of research on your own. And so, there's lots of characteristics that are sort of important and, depending on who you are, different things may be more important to you or less important. But some sort of general considerations would be the size of the firm and then also the size of the office that you're looking at. Because, some people want to be part of a big international firm, but they may want to be in a smaller office of that firm. And then, the opposite can be true where you really want to be in the headquarters office of a certain firm. And I think there's advantages and disadvantages to both.
Right. Yeah, I just want to break in on that point a little bit because I think sometimes people don't really understand that, particularly in some firms, I think there really is that sense. You mentioned the headquarters office of like a headquarters and a bunch of satellite offices. And I think sometimes people join those satellite offices not really realizing that, they're not the power center. Can you just talk a little bit more about how to think through that?
So I think this is something that firms will sort of sell you on, and it's not necessarily true, that like they have no headquarters office. There are no satellite offices. It's something I've noticed a lot recently. Even if you look on their website and that the firm was like started in, let's say, Chicago, and everyone knows they're a Chicago firm, they don't want to like be a Chicago firm. They say like, oh, you get whatever resources in every office. I don't think that's true in reality. If you're in the main office, the largest office, let's say the office where they started, that's probably where most of sort of the professionals are. That's going to be probably where a lot of practice group heads are. You'll probably have more access to people who are important at the firm. And I think that matters. Just kind of resources and getting things signed off on. Just kind of hearing about things, being more involved in what's happening. So I think those are some things that are happening in the main office. And then I think there are also reasons why being in the smaller office can be great. You may feel like you know everyone in the office. If you're in one that's, let's say, 250 lawyers, that's a lot. And there are offices that are 400 lawyers. And so you're not going to know everyone. I think sometimes the smaller office can be, sort of a nice feel to it. And then a lot of times if you're in the smaller office of the big firm, you still do get the resources of the big firm. So, that would be a reason why that might be appealing.
I think that's right. And I think a lot of this is personal preference. Someone who's diehard about, I definitely want to make partner at this particular firm. I think you probably want to be in like that nerve center type of office, because the reality is that's where the decisions are being made. If you're more someone who says, I think I see myself at a firm for a few years, I'd like to have the nicest experience possible, then maybe you sign up for one of these smaller offices in a location you want to be in, take advantage of the resources, and then maybe you don't have as much pressure. It's just a more congenial environment. But I think, as with many things, it's kind of personal preference. But definitely, this is, one of the things you want to look at. What else do you want to look at?
I think you want to look at the location that you want to be, and then you also want to look at how many offices they have, and do people move between offices? I think that's something to really keep in mind.
Do you think that's easy to find out? How do you find that out?
It's not necessarily easy to find out how good they are with transfers. It's easy to find out where they have offices, and definitely look and see how big the offices are. Because let's say that there's a city you're considering in the future, but, most offices of the firm are like 50 to 200 lawyers, and that office has 4. It's going to be unlikely that you're going to be able to get to that office with the 4 lawyers. Look at what practice groups are in that office. Is it even what you're interested in? I think it's something, though, you can, if it's a firm you're really interested in, you can sort of ask around and see if people have transferred offices. That's something you can find out kind of by talking to people. But I do think generally firms will sort of not love the question. So it's not something that I would ask like the recruiter or the hiring partner or somebody like that, because they don't want to feel like you're just trying to get from their office to like another office that might be in a more desirable location.
Yeah, I always found it interesting too at OCI, like which firms specifically you had to interview at certain offices and which one it was more like you interviewed at the firm. I thought that was kind of telling too.
Definitely. And I think the trend there is to do more firm-wide hiring in that way. And so, I think the message that a lot of firms are giving are, you're at the firm, it doesn't really matter which office you're in, but you need to find out, like, what is it really like?
Right. All right. What else? What should people be thinking about?
Definitely practice groups. So you don't need to know what practice group you want to be in. I think it's totally fine to be open. But if you do know what practice group you want to be in, you feel strongly about it, you should know where, that group is located. And I have had students like not even, realize what practice groups were in an office and like describe a practice group that we didn't have.
Right.
And that's really embarrassing.
Yeah, I was going to say sometimes this can be also, you may not know what you want to practice, but you know what you don't want to practice. So, if you're interviewing at a firm, say, for example, that is, highly known for its bankruptcy practice, for example, you probably ought to have at least some openness to doing that, if you're considering that. Yeah. If not, don't interview with that firm.
Exactly. So I think if you're totally open, then this probably doesn't matter as much. Or maybe you want to pick a firm that's sort of half corporate, half litigation, which a lot of big firms are. And it doesn't really matter. But definitely, if they have a specialty or if you have a specialty, you need to just be educated on it and know like what's big in that office.
Yeah, I remember the firm I worked at after law school actually didn't have a corporate practice. They only were litigation. So it was always sort of funny when you did the interview and someone was like, oh, well, I'm interested in M&A. And I'm like, why am I talking to you? Goodbye.
It's just very embarrassing. That's like an automatic.
Yeah, that's just literally like, we can stop this interview right now. You are not being hired here. Goodbye.
And I've had the same thing happen where people mention an office that we don't have, which
right.
is another embarrassing
That's
thing.
Slightly less embarrassing, but still.
Definitely.
Yeah. You need to be up on like the basics here. Don't embarrass yourself.
Yeah, and you should know a little bit about, every firm that you're sort of interested in or going to be talking to.
Right. I mean, if you've gotten to the point at least of having an interview, I think you need to know, I would say, beyond like the very basic information about this firm.
Exactly.
All right. What else should people be looking at when they're doing their research?
I think it's great to look at diversity in the office. That's all going to be on the NALP form. And it'll give you all the numbers they have to report. So male, female, and, it's kind of broken up into a lot of different categories. And so you can see what the numbers look like in the different offices and then as the firm as a whole. And that, maybe is going to inform your decision.
Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of this, like you said, is, you can get the basic numbers. I think you can look on the website. You can kind of get a sense of, obviously people are probably saying most of the right things, but then when the rubber really meets the road, are they doing that or not?
Yeah, I think every single firm is going to say diversity is important to them.
Exactly.
And every single firm is going to have a diversity committee, and a lot of them are going to have a head of diversity, and all of these really high-level roles. But it's like, what does that actually equal in terms of who works there?
Right.
And that's something, like you said, you can see pretty easily.
Right. I think you can also, if that is something you're interested in, you can look at the difference between who are they bringing in as associates and who ends up being partner. All of these kind of things can give you hints about what it's probably like to work there.
Exactly. Because I think it tells you something if they have, X number of new female associates, how many eighth years are there?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
That kind of thing. So, there's some things, though, there are going to be issues at every single firm. So I think there's things, though, that are sort of better and worse. And so if that's something that's important to you, it's something I would look at. Another area is pro bono work. Is there a certain amount that everyone is required to do? A lot of big firms have that now. It's not something that I would bring up in any early interview with anyone. If you're looking at BigLaw particularly, the focus is never going to be the pro bono work. It's, a money-making operation.
Right. I remember I was doing an interview one place in New York and I was kind of running out of things to ask about. And I said, I thought this was a softball question. Oh, tell me about your pro bono work. And the guy basically looked at me and said, well, if that's something that's important to you, this is probably not the right place.
But that's good that he said that you heard it too, I guess.
Yeah, and I agree with him. It probably wasn't the right place, but I thought it was a softball question that didn't really turn out that way.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have those questions for that exact reason, sort of in their back pocket. But usually a firm will have a lot of stuff published on their website about the pro bono work that they do, the type of work. And I would say usually there is sort of an hours requirement that, the attorneys are technically supposed to all do. And that can kind of tell you how seriously they take it, if that's something, that's important to you. Another thing I would do is just kind of look at sort of the latest news. Have they had any big cases? Has there been anything negative out there? And I think that's something to particularly look at now, as a lot of firms have to make cuts in different areas. Furloughs, a lot of partners are not taking their draws, all sorts of things that firms have to do to sort of survive through COVID. And so I would get an idea, how does it seem like they're managing?
Right. This is where Above the Law is probably going to be your friend. Because they're reporting on a lot of these sort of COVID pandemic related issues. And as we talked about in a different podcast we did before, this is not the first time this has happened. You can also look back to the 2008 recession and kind of see how these places have handled, situations that are challenging for anyone. And then some places handle them better or worse.
Right. And I don't think that not doing anything or, acting like there is nothing going on is necessarily a good thing either. Right. I would want to think that they addressed it, and even making some kind of cuts are not necessarily a negative. How did they do it? Yeah. So, did they defer their incoming class? Did they rescind the offers? There are a lot of different options. So make sure that you're doing your research on that, because you want a firm that's going to be around when you are an associate.
Right. And again, I think that's probably not something you want to bring up if you get to the point of the first interview. But some people may not be aware, after you have the job offer, you can typically ask to have more interviews with people, or you can ask more pointed questions. And I think that's probably the time to do that conversation.
Right. I mean, like, there's a lot of, in recent years, firms that have had mergers. And so that's something I definitely wouldn't bring up going into it. But once you have an offer, I would ask, how does the transition been? Kind of get a feel for, what the mood is.
Yeah. Maybe ask to talk to people from the new firm and the old firm, because usually, I mean, let's face it, most of the time with a merger, one person kind of absorbs the other entity. Yeah. So, you probably want to talk to people on both sides of that transaction about, well, what has it been like? You guys all moved over here. How has that been?
Yeah. And I think that you'll get more real answers than you expect.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Interviews are funny because sometimes people will just, make stuff up and try to tell you what they think you want to hear. But oftentimes they don't. I mean, you hear some crazy stuff. I definitely have had situations where I'd ask a question and somebody would say, all right, why don't you shut the door right now? And I'll tell you the truth.
And I think that's even more true, right? Like we said, once you have the offer,
right,
and you're coming back for like a follow-up visit. So, keep that all in mind for later, because you have every right to try to find this stuff out.
Right. And I think, you just want to make it kind of the understanding of like, I'm looking for the right fit and I want to be sure I understand what I'm getting into. And I think people generally respect that.
Yeah. And I think they want to find the right fit too.
Right. Exactly. I mean, nobody thinks working at a law firm is like unicorns and roses all the time. So I think people want to have a realistic assessment of like, all right, this person understands what they're signing up for. I respect that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what do you think are the best places to find this information? How can people go about doing this research?
So I kind of start any research with Google, which I think most people probably do. I would just kind of look for general information on the firm. And I think that's where you can find more of the news and like you said, like gossip websites and things like that. And then I think there's the standard websites that kind of rank firms and give you like the basic information. And if I were you, I'd put it into a chart. So there's the American Lawyer, and they do a lot of surveys, which I think are really important. There's Vault, which also does rankings. There's just the U.S. News, which, ranks schools, but they also, have employer information. There's NALP, which I think we've talked about before. And I think this is a great source of information because they have these forms that everyone fills out the same form. And, the information is just there. So it's what I was talking about with diversity. Like they have to say, who in different groups are in, each office. It has all the practice group information. That's where all the recruiters will be listed and the hiring partners. And so you'll have like current names. And there is a paper form, but now it's all also online. And I'm pretty sure that it can be like updated so you can trust that it's pretty current. And so I think that is a great source of information for lots of details that you're not going to find on, the other places that I mentioned that kind of do like more of a high level look at everywhere. And some of those also have like a few kind of reviews. So it'll have like positive and negatives that employees have said. And all of this stuff I would sort of put together to say like, this will give you a whole picture. I wouldn't take one of these things and say, that's everything. And then also what you said about above the law, which some of that stuff isn't true. And some of it is disgruntled people, but a lot of it is true. And you can sort of see, what most people are saying. So I would say, you can take some of this stuff with a grain of salt, but you can also see what kind of picture it's all like putting together for you.
Right. I think that makes sense. How much stock do you think people should put in these surveys, like the mid-level associate surveys or everyone's favorite? I know if you're recruiting a summer associate survey.
Yeah, so I'll tell you the truth about the summer associate survey and all of these surveys. So I do think you can find real information in them. I actually think the mid-level survey is probably the most honest one for whatever reason. That being said, I would take some of this stuff with a grain of salt because, a lot of I think you sort of get both sides. You get people that are really disgruntled at whatever level that they're at. Like there tends to be people at certain levels at law firms who are generally not happy. And then the thing about the summer associate survey is it is graded on such a ridiculous curve that it's hard to take any of it seriously. I think that out of 5, getting like a 4.5 is terrible. So that shows you how, sort of ridiculous it is. Pretty much all firms like tell all their summers, just so you know, a 5 is basically like we did like a decent job. So, and I think there are even firms that sort of give prizes, and they say the prize is just to complete it, but I think it's a little like wink, wink. Like,
yeah, I definitely,
it's reflecting on us personally.
I definitely recall being basically like bribed to complete these surveys. Like, oh, we're not telling you what to say. We're just saying you can have an ice cream party if you all do it.
Exactly. But that being said, I would still look at them because I think there is some useful information. And usually if something is overall really negative compared to other firms, that's where I would kind of look at it. Like, did they seem much better than all the other firms or much worse than all the other firms? Or is everyone sort of around the same point? And then you can say, it probably doesn't mean that much if everyone's sort of getting the same grade.
Right. What do you think about law firm websites? Do you think those are useful at all?
I think they're interesting to give you a sense of like who the firm is. I actually think their websites do tell you some of that, even just like how easy is it to navigate? Like, do they take their technology seriously? What's the message that they're trying to sell to you on the website? I'm really skeptical of anywhere that markets themselves as a lifestyle firm.
Do people even say that on their website? That's ridiculous.
They say it in like code word, like we have a great work-life balance. Right.
Yeah. You're a law firm. That's not true.
Yeah. And if you're saying that, it's probably the opposite. Like, like, why are you protesting so much?
I mean, I think sometimes, I don't know. I think sometimes you see firms who say that are kind of known for that. And maybe they, relatively speaking, have a slightly better work-life balance, but it's not good by any reasonable standard.
I just am skeptical of anyone who really wants to push that agenda. But
yeah, I can see that.
That's just how I feel. And I think, you can sort of take that, as you will. But I do think the websites are important to go to. Well, partially because they do like list all this information. And I think you kind of want to double check things.
Right.
Because just because you're looking at these publications, like what if they were published, whatever time ago, and it turns out they opened a new office or they closed a new office, I definitely think you want to go to their website to kind of get some of that information.
Right. Anytime you're doing if you're sending like letters or something, you definitely want to double check that you have all of the newly current named partners, because the reality is, people go on and off of the names of firms all the time. And if you're sending your letter to the wrong people, that's not going to look great.
Definitely. I mean, it's one thing if like, they switched recruiters a couple weeks ago. So
I'm talking more like, the firm name has changed. Like they've dropped someone.
I've seen that a lot. Yes. And firms change their names all the time. Yeah. I think people don't even realize it. And a lot of them maybe have a longer name, but they go by like just the first one.
Yeah.
And so you should do whatever they're, doing on the website. But I do think that the firm websites can kind of give you a sense of what kind of place it is.
Yeah, and I think sometimes this is also like the outlier cases. 80% of them look basically the same, but then you see these 20% who are like pretty different. You can probably guess that like, okay, somebody actually like, has really thought about this. They have tried to send a different message. Like maybe there's something different going on here. I think that can be an interesting flag versus the sort of, we're pretty generic. Let's face it, we're a law firm. We do these things.
Exactly. I totally agree.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about rankings. I know, law students are pretty ranking obsessed. What about law firm rankings? How important are these?
I think that people put way too much stock in rankings, kind of in a similar way that they do to schools. And so, you probably did this when you were looking at law schools. I think it's similar in that there's different tiers. And so, there's sort of a top tier of big law firms, and then there's going to be sort of the next level. And to me, anyone that's sort of within the same tier is usually similar enough that I don't think it matters that you're at the firm that was ranked 12th or the firm that was ranked 20th, in my opinion.
Right. And isn't a lot of this basically based on things like profits per partner?
Exactly, which is a super skewed number. And a lot of firms aren't even releasing it anymore because it's not accurate.
Right. It's basically a meaningless number.
Yeah.
I personally think if anything, it tells you almost like what a worse place to work in is going to be, because how do those profits come in because you work more, basically?
Exactly. No, and I think that people just think it's easier to sort of go by these rankings. It seems sort of simpler, and this is just what makes you better. And I would look at the overall picture of what kind of place is it to work.
Right.
Now, obviously, there are advantages to being at sort of a top tier firm in terms of resources and the relationships you're going to develop and maybe the training you're going to get. But I don't think that's necessarily something that's ranked higher is going to give you more in your career. I think it's more important to figure out, what matters to you.
Right. And I think this is also another one of those cases where you've got to think a little bit longer term. If you know that maybe you're just going to be at a firm for a few years and you have the option to go to, some very fancy place, maybe you just do that, you suck it up, you do your couple of years, and then you get out and you do something else. But if you're someone who's thinking more, this is a long-term proposition, you might be better off starting at a place that maybe is less competitive and more supportive, and they're more invested in investing in you as an individual and like seeing you succeed. In the end, that might be a much better choice.
Absolutely. And I actually one time had a summer associate who had gotten an offer from the firm I was at, and we had like heavily tried to recruit and went with a firm that was, ranked slightly higher. And had done his summer there and came to me after the summer and said, I think I made a really big mistake, and, wanted to come back as a 3L, and we weren't hiring any 3Ls. And he just directly said, I wish I hadn't looked at the rankings.
No, I will say the firm I hated absolutely the most and, had the most horrible experience ever at was definitely the highest ranked place I worked, It was terrible.
I think that is absolutely true. I think the number one thing that you should be looking at when you're doing this research is, where would I do best? Like happiness-wise, career-wise, where would I develop the most?
Right. And people have different opinions on what they think that's going to look like. So I think there's probably a better and worse fit for a lot of different people. And I agree. You can't just be like, well, if I get, to ranking number 10, I'm going to take that versus number 12, even though 12, everyone seemed really nice. It's like, that is a stupid choice.
Yes. I also noticed that I think firms sometimes sort of have a reputation or something that people say about them, like it's sort of this kind of place. And sometimes people pick things like, I want to be that kind of person.
Right.
Like, I think it's cool. Or, whatever word. And I think sometimes they're not thinking about who am I really? Right. Where will I fit in? There are places where it's really intellectual and it's sort of nerdy, but you have to be like, oh, I am kind of like that. And that's okay.
Or I'm not. And maybe I should do something, go to the more social firm because that's actually who I am.
Exactly. So I think it's if you have a lot of options, it's, a chance to sort of figure out, where you would fit in best.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that's kind of how I got sucked into the place I hated, was I was like, oh, this sounds so cool, but it really wasn't me.
Yeah, and I think that is probably the number one thing that people say after when something really doesn't work out.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, we're running out of time. Any final thoughts on this?
My final thoughts are, aside from all the research that you can sort of do that's objective and online and looking at these publications, I would try your hardest to talk to previous summer associates, junior associates, people who, you'll be in their position soon, and see what they'll tell you, because that's really the best source of information. What was it really like?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think you also have to recognize some of those people will definitely 100% lie to you. So talk to more than one of them and then kind of triangulate and see like, maybe. And also I think you just have to be a little bit skeptical, because some people will just tell you outright things, but sometimes people will kind of shade things a little bit and you can kind of see what they're saying. But you have to really kind of be observant about what are they actually trying to tell me here without saying it outright.
And I'll just say, as a recruiter, like, even if there is sort of a sense of like, you're trying to recruit the best people, and there are certainly law students that all the firms, are going after. But overall, if I'm trying to recruit someone, I'm trying to recruit the person who's going to fit in their best and is going to get an offer and do well and move on. So I think like, hopefully the place you're looking at, they're trying to find the right fit. You're trying to find the right fit. And like, if I were you, I would put all of this information together and kind of figure out like, what is the snapshot that you're getting.
Right. Because as a recruiter, you want to recruit someone who's going to be successful there.
Absolutely. I also think that like these days with kind of the market being so tight, kind of I would rank like the firms that you're applying to. And I think you can kind of, you're obviously going to have to apply to places that won't be the best fit. And I don't think you should look at places that just completely wouldn't work. But, I would kind of figure out, kind of what your order of importance is.
Right. I think people maybe have to be open-minded in certain ways, but that doesn't mean that you throw all of your preferences out the window.
Exactly.
All right. Well, with that, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. For more career help and the opportunity to work one-on-one with us, including making a list of where you should apply, check out careerdicta.com. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app, because we would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.